You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Sean Brodrick, natural resource specialist at the Oxford Club. His website, investmentu.com. Welcome to the show, Sean.
Thanks very much for having me on.
You're the first person I've talked to since the U.S. Fed has decided to hike interest rates, although it's probably the smallest hike you could ever do. But it's the first time they've hiked a rate in 9 years to the day, from 0% to 0.25.
Yes, and yet still that will not stop people from wringing their hands and saying this is going to cost, like, the U.S. huge amounts of money. It will burst the bubble. This is the beginning of the end. I don't think so. I think that our economy and our market is strong enough that it can take this and it'll just shrug it off, really. Now, we won't know the immediate effects. I wouldn't read too much into one day's trading, but over the course of the next week, we should see how things really sink in.
Now, of course, when they lowered rates, the whole idea was that companies would go out, borrow money at a cheap rate, and then go and invest it into new factories, new employees, new inventions. But instead, they bought up stock with the cheap money. So was that what they planned to do anyway with the cheap money, and did it help?
Yeah, well, at first it helped. It's had less and less effect over time. That's really the problem, right? Is that you have to say the market's kind of gotten used to have, one word for it would be high-speed chicken feed. I mean, this is the heroin of the financial markets, right? So we have to wean things off. But certainly the large companies did not do what the Fed had hoped for, and did not take that money and actually invest that in, like, new plants, new equipment. Quite the opposite. Here's the thing, though. The Fed felt its hands were tied because Congress wasn't doing anything to stimulate the economy. What the Fed would have rather have seen they would have had Congress do, like, a big roads bill, because we have all these falling down bridges and stuff like that in America, and really work on the problem from that side. Since Congress was not doing that, the Fed felt that it had to do something to try and stimulate the economy. I think they did a pretty good job. I mean, sure, we saw resources misallocated and all that stuff, and too much easy money for too long certainly will be a problem. And I can see why the Fed wants to raise rates now, even though there is no inflation. I mean, that's the other thing. There is no inflation, but the Fed wants to raise rates because they worry that when the next recession comes, they won't have any way to actually stimulate the, like, economy. And actually, I think that's a smart move for that reason, simply because I think that we could see a rocky 2016, so the Fed might have to, move the old rate thing in the other direction sooner rather than later, certainly sooner than they were actually planning on doing.
Now, if you're a car manufacturer, low rates were great. You could get a long-term loan from a car company for virtually nothing. Are they going to change that policy now, or will they try to keep the rates as low as possible?
Well, they will try and keep them as low as possible, and I am one of those people who got this insane 5-year car loan. I mean, I couldn't believe how cheap it was. It was really free money. And they'll have to change that a bit. We are seeing that priced in right now. People are really worried this will affect the car companies because they've had some amazing sales over the last few months. Amazing sales. They've had amazing sales numbers. But here's the thing, is that how much of that was juiced by these low rates? Nobody really knows. I mean, they can make their calculations, but we'll only see when rates start to actually head up. Now, one thing that's really important is that Janet Yellen said she was going to raise rates slowly and gradually so as not to actually shock the market. She's looking for maybe a 1.5% rate at the end of 2016. That is quite slow, quite gradual. You could get there, I guess, with 4 rate hikes over the course of the next year. So that's her plan for the perfect world. If something goes wrong, then she won't be able to do that. And but then if something goes wrong, then we won't see actually as many cars sold because people only really buy a car when they're feeling pretty optimistic. That's one thing that I think could hurt the market, in like 2016 is it's an election year, and at least some people in the process seem to want to scare the living daylights out of the people who are actually going to head out to the voting booths. And so if they keep up the fear campaign all year long, that can make people really scared. People end up hiding under their beds. They might find some, like, missing socks, but it won't be so good for the economy.
Well, one good thing about rising interest rates is that it might encourage people to save money again.
Yeah, but money's still dirt cheap. I mean, that's why I'm not really expecting that much of a change. I mean, even if we get to 1.5%, money is still going to be dirt cheap. As long as you have no inflation, that's the real incentive to not spend. And right now, we don't have any inflation. If we start to see inflation, and so that would be a change. If we start to see real inflation and people thinking, you know, I have this money in the bank and with inflation it's not really worth as much as it used to be, then they'll have incentive to head out and actually spend that money. But until we see prices pick up, that's not really going to happen. I wouldn't make one more point on that, which is that we've seen really low inflation over the course of the past year because oil prices have been falling like a rock. Now, it depends on which camp you are in right now. Do you believe a Goldman Sachs that the price of oil could go down to $20 a barrel? Or do you think that we'll find a price support level close to where we are now? Because if prices continue to go lower, then we'll continue to have that deflationary force in the environment. However, if the price of oil flattens and just goes flat, that deflationary force will be removed from the numbers. And so other prices that are going up will start to feed in, and then we'll start to see inflation again.
Well, I don't know how accurate Goldman Sachs is with their predictions. I think they predicted gold would be at $750 by now.
Well, yeah, of course they're always talking their book, aren't they? I mean, they actually trade on the stuff that they do, and so they probably are big bears in this market right now. That's one other thing that we have to think about is so many people, so many hedge funds, you name it, are actually bearish on oil right now. It won't take much good news to actually send it in the other direction. We actually did have some news that might be bullish for oil recently, which is that the U.S. Senate, we had an agreement where now the limit on how much U.S. crude oil can be sent out of the country will be lifted. So it'll be unlimited. That'll put U.S. crude on a, say a fair playing field with the rest of the world, oil from everywhere else. That could have an effect on the whole global price of oil. That said, you have to remember the U.S. is still an oil importer, so as much oil as we send out, we're going to have to import more. So that's kind of a mixed bag there, too.
Well, as long as you buy it from Canada, we don't mind.
We love Canadian oil. It's so cheap. That's the funny thing. I mean, we talk about what the price of oil is. It all depends on where that oil is, right? I mean, because oil from Canada trades at a big discount to U.S. oil. Mexican oil trades at a big discount. Saudi oil trades at a discount. So it all depends on where the oil is, if it's light sweet, if it's heavy sour. There is no one set price of oil. There's just kind of a general trend in the broad price.
The Paris Climate Accord, what's that going to do to energy prices?
Well, you know, it really wasn't good news for coal if everybody sticks to what they say they're going to do. That said, there's nothing really binding in what people agreed to. An interesting thing that happened there was India tried to blackmail the developed world, the World Bank, U.S., Europe, that kind of thing, for $1.5 trillion, that's with a T, in aid, saying, look, you have to pay to help us transition to this next-gen fuel economy where everything's like wind and solar and you name it, or we're going to have to build coal plants from one side of India to the other, and they still have on their books plans to build all these things. They tried to blackmail the world's major powers. They really didn't get anywhere because I think at this point nobody has $1.5 trillion to spare, you know? So, I guess they'll be building more coal plants, but the writing's on the wall for coal. I mean, I don't think it's going away. I think it'll still be a huge amount of the global energy supply. But the thing about coal is it often can be locally sourced. So if India mines more of its own coal, which is what it's planning to do, then it won't need to buy as much coal from, like, say, Australia or even the U.S., though frankly they would probably buy it from Australia because theirs is cheaper and closer. And so we'll probably see the same thing in, like, China as well. While they'll do more stuff to have cleaner air, they'll also have more of their own coal, and they'll locally source it. So I do think the problem might be for, like, Western coal companies might not come out the real winners from those climate talks. But the big winner has to be solar. Also wind, certainly, but solar is going to get all kind of boosts and stuff like that. So that is good news that way.
We'll have more with Sean Brodrick right after the break.
See singing impressionist Andre Philippe Gagnon.
And I think to myself,
In Oliver, December 29th. In Kelowna, December 30th. Buy online and save at ontourtickets.com. Unbelievable harmonies, spectacular performance, the ultimate tribute to the Everly Brothers and Simon and Garfunkel. Bird Dog and the Vintage Electric Band, Saturday, January 9th at the Alex Goulden Hall. Buy online and save at ontourtickets.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Sean Brodrick. Sean, you mentioned just before the break that solar might go really big, and of course solar uses a lot of silver. Will that eventually start boosting silver prices even if gold doesn't go up much?
Well, that's what silver miners tell me. I mean, these guys keep saying that. I would like to believe them. I would like to believe, yes, it'll boost it quite a bit. We just haven't seen that yet. Now, that said, silver had a solid move in the past week. It actually looks like it's putting in a bottom. That doesn't mean the bottom. Let's not get too excited about the bottom. But we're starting to see moves in precious metals. It looks like a bottom of some sort may be forming. And it's that time of year where that can certainly happen. And so, we could see higher silver prices. But will we see enough solar to really change the equation in silver? I thought that we might see that, in like October, November, but we didn't see it then. And so we're really going to have to see that before we say, oh, that's what's going to happen, because apparently we're only going to see that in the rearview mirror.
Now, of course, if we start installing a lot of solar and wind power plants, that will create jobs, but not in the long run, because once they're up and running, there's nothing new to build. You just maintain it with 5 guys. What's going to happen with all these people who worked in the oil industry if we all decide to start driving electric cars?
Oh, well, that's a whole nother topic, which is not only in the oil industry, but all industries, because so many jobs can be replaced by robots now. That's the frightening thing, is so many jobs can be replaced by robots, and over the course of the next 10 years, for example, truck drivers. Do you really need them, or else could a robot pretty much bring things around and, do that kind of thing? So I think that's a huge challenge for the economy, and we might have to rethink work. We might have to think, have some kind of a basic income, that kind of thing, which is one of the ideas that's actually being, floated around and stuff like that. Hopefully things go along smoothly. I wouldn't like to see any unrest because of it. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but it is a problem for all these things simply because how we work and how work is actually done is actually changing right under our noses.
Well, sure. I mean, Japan started the whole robot craze back in the 60s because of their demographics. They're not having kids. They have an aging population, and they need something to make those automobiles and TV sets and so on. So they invented these worker robots. The thing is, that's going to expand into so many other industries not in Japan. And how do you make up for it? I mean, I thought they might have to put a robot tax on just to pay for all the people who are unemployed by robots.
Well, again, solving that problem will be really interesting. I'd like to see how Canada solves it, because you'll probably solve it first before the U.S. The U.S. only seems to do things at the last minute in a great hurry and at 3 times the expense that it should cost, whereas Canada seems to take a more measured approach to these things. So I'm eagerly waiting to see what solution Canada comes up to this, because right now there aren't any easy ones, that's for sure.
Well, yes, with a plan to get away from fossil fuels for a province like Alberta that heavily depends on oil and gas. I mean, they're quaking in their boots. Real estate prices are falling. People are losing their jobs like crazy. But on the other hand, the people who are technicians, for example, in the oil industry, it's mostly pipes and valves. Well, if you're doing solar power or geothermal, it's pipes and valves. You just ship a new kind of energy.
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly very smart people with skills hopefully will be able to retrain and find jobs somewhere else. The problem is if whole lines of work go out of work, right? I mean, that's something that actually worries me quite a lot. I write about robots, and of course, that's another field where they always promise the next best thing is right around the corner, and it seems to take longer and longer because they can't quite get them to do exactly what they do. The human brain is a fascinating thing, and it can take all this weird information that it never had before and process it and actually come up with some kind of solution. It's hard for a robot to do that because they have no free will, and they can't think about things that they haven't actually thought about before, they're just programmed. So that keeps humans in the loop for a while longer. One solution might be to actually have the man-in-the-loop law, which is something that has been talked about, where people aren't actually working anymore, but they're just looking at the robots, watching them work just to make sure in case something goes wrong, there's actually humans around who can turn things on and off and actually make things work. And so you keep people standing around, you pay them, but that's one way to actually solve the problem.
Well, the Japanese actually have a word for being worked to death because people, are working 900 hours a week and literally die at their desk. And they also have a word for murder by robot because in their auto plants, some of those robots have gone insane and have started welding people.
So, I mean, that is horrible for anyone involved. I wouldn't want to be welded by a robot.
Well,
but you can see that happening. Yeah, because, programming breaks down. Anyone who owns a computer knows that programming breaks down. Things get infected. There are kids sitting in basements coming up with new viruses to feed to your computer all the time. God, I took my computer in because it had really slowed down, and they just were amazed by the bunch of malware that I had on there, which comes from, just going around on the web, opening up emails, you name it, just stuff piles up. And sure, that could happen in some big, industrial robot, and you'd hate to be that industrial robot running this giant, massive mining truck and just going berserk and rolling over everything like a steamroller, only much faster. So, I can see why you might want to keep people around for a while longer just in case things start to go wrong.
Well, yes, the crashable computer. I'm thinking about if you have a driverless car. What if it gets hacked and somebody puts in an order that every driverless car is to turn left at that moment?
Well, you are talking about the crime novels of the future, my friend. In fact, Tom Clancy should be writing that novel right about now, because that is what terrorists will do. That is what bad guys will do. Someone will actually hijack someone's life, and they'll demand to be paid, or else have that guy say, maybe do something rotten in order to get their life back. That kind of thing will go on. And I've been speaking about that. It's quite frightening. But I don't think it can be stopped. All we can really do is try and control these things and limit how much our lives will change and how fast they'll change, and hopefully keep some of the bad side effects out. Yeah. That's really all we can hope for at this point.
And of course, if you have a human in the loop, well, what if you have a bad human?
That is the other problem. Yes.
We seem to have no shortage of them.
In fact, I speak to people in the internet security business all the time, and something it's some amazing numbers, 75% of all the times that these high-tech systems are cracked, it isn't Russians, it's someone inside the company who has a grudge, and they're cracking it and selling the information to someone else, or just letting someone else know how they can actually access things. So it's often a human link that is a problem. That said, you don't want to go without humans, because any electronic system can be cracked at some point or another, which is probably why in Russia, the KGB no longer puts any information on computers. Now they've gone back to typewriters because people like us and the Chinese were stealing their information so much. So, I mean, that is one solution, to go completely backwards. And that would create a lot more paperwork, though. I'm sure that keeps many typists employed. But sometimes when you get down to it, the only solution is a really radical solution. That said, the future doesn't scare me as much as it used to sometimes. I think we'll work things out. And I think there's plenty of, investment opportunities that is really, focused around this stuff. Lots of ways to actually make money. And so that should be helpful as well.
Yes, somebody wrote an article about New York City officials back in the late 1800s said, if we keep growing at the same rate population-wise with all the horses that are used, every day we'll have to soon deal with 1.5 million tons of horse poop. How will we do? Well, then we invented the automobile. The pollution goes into the air. It doesn't land on the street.
Well, that's a fascinating thing that you bring up. Do you know one of the big things that actually moved the automobile along, no pun intended, but why people turned to automobiles was a huge flu wiped out a big chunk of the horse population on Earth. And so suddenly they didn't have horses. They were depending on them, but these guys were saying, well, we have these contraptions with 4 wheels and they don't work half the time, but you can use it to move things around. And they said, we'll take one, because it wouldn't drop dead the way that a horse did. And so it was in response to a crisis. That was one of the things that really got people motivated toward using vehicles that ran on fuel and not vehicles that ran on hay, because just because that weird crisis came along. There are all kinds of things that can go wrong. We can hope that our responses to them will be somewhat smart. When I look at the political landscape, I don't see that smarts right now, or at least here in the U.S. I should not cast any aspersions on Canada. You guys seem to be doing fine. But man, it is crazy scary down here. But I hope that as one crisis after another comes along, which they will, we make the smart choices, and the next solutions we have, then we'll look back at something we used to use and say, boy, that was like a horse and buggy. Aren't we glad we got rid of that? We're on to something much better. That's my hope.
Sean, best of the season.
Best of the season to you. And certainly my best to all of your listeners and subscribers, because it should be a very interesting year coming up. Lots of opportunities.
Well, that's
I think that we can really make some money, and there's a lot of interesting things going on in the market now, so I look forward to that.
Thank you very much again.
All right, bye-bye.
My guest has been Sean Brodrick, Natural Resources Specialist at the Oxford Club. His website, investmentu.com. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Comments about the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.